Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. This is going to be the last one for the year, and in it I'm going to be taking a look at the holiday token cost uniform for Magik. Unlike the other holiday uniforms that have been either really good in PvE or have been really great support additions, this one has PvP effects on it, and seemingly it is a PvP uniform. Because of this reason and potentially some other ones that I'll cover in the video, many people have said that this uniform isn't really worth the tokens because she doesn't really perform that well in PvE, and that she likely won't really see any top usage in things like timeline for PvP and would mostly just be relegated to being an Alliance Conquest character. However, for my testing, I found that the character at T3 level 70 actually outperformed Magneto's new uniform, so she definitely does have some value in PvE if you play her correctly. Jumping straight into it, all of my testing for the character was with no damage proc, and I initially started with her at T2 just to get an idea of how much of an improvement the T3 makes, as well as how much damage her skills 1 through 5 do, and to see how much the T3 contributes to the overall damage. Just at T2, the character didn't do too great, but was okay versus stage 99 of Thanos, finishing with close to about a minute left. Because of the all defense down on the 4th skill going up to 40%, her performance versus Cull Obsidian was much better, and I finished that in about 2 minutes, or with roughly around 3 minutes remaining. Once you get the character to T3, she becomes considerably better because the T3 also offers her a 50% damage buff across all of her skills that lasts for 20 seconds. In addition to that, the ultimate skill can be delay cancelled, meaning you can go into your other skills and layer on more damage to fill up the ultimate again and repeat the process. With the ultimate skill unlocked, I was able to improve my clear time by around a minute and 30 seconds. And then versus Cull Obsidian, because the clear time was already relatively quick, the clear time improved by only about 60 seconds. Because World Boss Legend is a better gauge at how strong the character is in PvE nowadays, I also took her into that, and I didn't use her leadership or supports to give a better benchmark in terms of her performance. She ended up finishing the stage with around 2 minutes and 35 seconds left, which is actually around 10 to 20 seconds faster than Magneto was able to do on my account, and because she completed it in that amount of time, almost reaching 2 minutes and 40 seconds left, it is a pretty good indicator that the character is strong for PvE. So if you're more interested in building her for that, a CTP of Rage is your most ideal option, not only because that is usually the go-to build now for most PvE characters, but because the character has many delay cancel skills, so if you try to use something like a CTP of Energy or Destruction, it might be difficult to time the proc on the skills that you want. To give you a better indication of the character's PvE performance, and because Ignore Dodge plays a bigger factor in the higher stages, I also took her into a stage 29 of Knull, again with no damage proc. Similar to other top tier PvE performers like Kamala Khan and Shuri, she was able to complete the stage with about a minute left, which gives you an idea of how good the character can be if you play her properly. The reason I say that is because the character, unlike Shuri and Kamala, is not easy to play, and you do have to play her in a specific way in order for her to perform well. The main thing that will either make or break her clear time and overall damage is how you time the second skill. If you aren't aware, Magik's second skill is an iframe ignore counter skill, and actually does a lot of damage if you are able to trigger the counter effect. But not only that, it does also give you a 50% damage increase not only to the counter skill, but also the next skill that you follow up with. So unlike most other characters where you're either cancelling the skill to fill up the ultimate quicker, or spamming the skills out quickly to layer on the damage, the second skill actually needs to be timed in order for you to get the counter hit, otherwise you won't get any damage from the second skill besides the initial hit that isn't nearly as powerful as the counter hit, and you won't get that 50% damage increase to your next skill either. This means that you do have to play the character in a really unique way, since you have to watch out when to effectively use the second skill to make the most out of it. Otherwise, you basically lose out on 100% damage increase overall, and all the damage that the second skill provides. Also, the character will be performing differently depending on the bosses that you fight, since some of them will offer more opportunity for you to spam that counter skill and easily get the counter hit and damage buff from it, whereas from other opponents, this might not be the case, and you might not be able to leverage that skill often, making the character far inferior than some other options. Taking that into consideration, the skill rotation that I would recommend for the character is to immediately open with the third skill and cancel it to get damage out right away, then go into the fourth skill and delay cancel that after she hits the ground with the sword and the blue lines appear, and then go into the fifth skill and delay cancel that after she hits the ground and the portal opens. If you cancel too early, before the portal opens, you will miss out on a lot of damage. From there, you want to follow up with the first skill, and then like I said, you want to look out for when the opponent is about to hit you to use your second skill. If you feel that the enemy isn't really going to hit you for a while, you can end up using the second skill just to fill up the ultimate a bit faster. Keep in mind that the second skill cooldown isn't too long, so you might want to not save it too often and miss out on charging up the ultimate. So there is a little bit of a fine balance there that you have to kind of get used to. Also, I mentioned the fourth skill before the fifth skill because the fourth skill provides you a damage buff across your other skills. If you find that you're proccing too early with the third skill and you're not really getting the proc up when the fourth and fifth skill are down on the field and hitting the enemy, then you can always use the third skill after the fourth or even the fifth skill. When you have your ultimate skill, make sure to use it before your other skills so that you can layer on the damage and fill up the ultimate again, but don't cancel the ultimate skill until the blue aura appears on the ground, otherwise the damage won't linger on afterwards. I also tested the character in Giant Boss Raid, and she was able to complete the first phase in under 2 minutes, meaning that she would have completed this fight entirely even with no damage proc. She likely won't be one of the top T3 options here though, because you can only go as fast as the opponent hitting you to be able again to utilize that second skill. Similarly in Alliance Battle Extreme, even though she does have a decent amount of cancel effects, she doesn't really score too well because she is so dependent on that second skill, and you do miss out on a lot of hits, which is what Alliance Battle Extreme and Alliance Battle Legend is based off of. Usually characters that can have a lot of hits end up scoring the highest there. And if you can't use your second skill consistently and often, then you won't really end up scoring too much. Even with full leadership and supports, I was only able to get 5.7 million, which if the character did end up scoring well, should have been easily around 8 million even with no damage proc. So you can see that the character's performance is somewhat split depending on the game modes and the ways that you play her. However, in PvP, she is far more consistent, though you do need her artifact in order to fully realize her potential there. I'd say that the artifact is definitely a must for the character because her survival isn't really that great. She has invincible on her fifth skill as well as a partial iframe on that skill. However, she doesn't really have any other iframes across her kit and only really has healing on her counter skill, fortunately before she counters, so you don't necessarily have to hit the counter to heal. And besides that, she only really has kind of some barriers on her third skill, but the AI doesn't really prioritize that skill. Speaking of the AI's rotation, it is good. However, she could have been a lot stronger if the AI used the third skill more often. The way that it's set up now, she usually opens with the second skill, which is good because it has that healing, penetration, and the counter iframe ignore skill. And then she often goes into her fifth skill, which gives her the invincible and the partial iframe, as well as a high hitting damage skill. From there, she often goes into her fourth skill, which gives her even more damage, and then she goes back into the second, and the rest of the skills rotate. This AI rotation does make her a bit more offensive since she gets buffs from the fourth skill, but it would have been nicer if she used the third skill because that gives her barriers to make her more defensive and survive longer, not activating the artifact, But besides that, the third skill also has super guard break, which means it would lock down the opponent more consistently too. The second skill also has super guard break on the counter hit, which is one of the reasons why it's so good, because it has an iframe ignore, healing, penetration, and that super guard break effect. The fifth skill is also a really good follow-up because it is a long partial iframe and has high priority, meaning that you'll go into it oftentimes before the opponent does anything. In terms of builds for her, I would say that a CTP of Greed is pretty good if you want to double down on the damage, since the Immortal Artifact will keep you alive, and you should be able to proc the ambush effect if you get a Reforged Greed. However, if the attack stats on your account are kind of high, you'll find that she does one-shot with her second skill, even with no damage proc. Because of this, I opted for Steel Authority instead, mainly because I found that her second skill was her main finishing move, and because it is on a somewhat short cooldown, I wanted her to utilize it as much as possible by surviving as long as she could. I went with Authority for several reasons, one of them being that she has kind of low survival because she doesn't really have iframe in her skills. She doesn't have damage accumulation, so that gives her more damage, and because she has low health, the CTP of Authority will be more effective than something like a regen. As you can see, the character is pretty good. I was able to take out full teams on auto, such as characters like Gore, Hulk, and even T4 Gene. If you want to try playing the character on manual and timeline, which I wouldn't really recommend considering the current meta of characters having 2 lives and a lot of super guard break to lock you down, but regardless, if you do want to try her there, you basically want to always open up with the third skill and cancel that immediately to go into your second skill. This will either one-shot the opponent or lock them down from the super guard break on the third and second skill long enough for you to go into your fifth skill and avoid any damage there for the third and second to come back off cooldown for you to finish them off. Also, if you're wondering how CTP of Destruction stacks up, it is okay, but I don't think it is as good as the CTP of Greed or Authority because you won't really be able to fill up that top proc as much from getting hit as you would with the Greed and Authority CTPs when they're reforged. The Destruction will provide you with that instant damage proc on the second skill, but the penetration will only increase by 5% and you won't really get many other benefits than that. I also got a chance to test the character out in Alliance Conquest, and I have to say she didn't really perform as well as I thought she would, mostly because I noticed that she opens with the second skill so quickly that the opponent doesn't really get a chance to hit her for the counter skill to activate. This is another reason why I found that damage proc doesn't really work as well on her, since you do want her to survive long enough for that second activation of the second skill to be able to counter and one-shot the opponent. Despite that, if you do build a good team around her, such as ones that give her support to not only increase her survival but also damage, then you can see she can take out some pretty top metas, like Carnage for example, with Agent Venom's support. As you can see, her uniform isn't nearly as bad as some people might have expected. It's actually quite good if you play her in a specific way. However, you do have to keep in mind that this is a premium uniform for a premium character, and it isn't a simple rotation like some other characters like Shuri or Kamala, which is the main reason why I wouldn't recommend getting her for PvE. The only players that I can really recommend the uniform to are people who play a lot of Alliance Conquest, and even for those players, you do kind of need her artifact for her to excel, since like I mentioned, she will likely end up dying fairly quickly if you can't get to that second activation of the second skill. Anyways, that rounds out the last video for this year, and I just noticed a day ago that I reached 5,000 subscribers on the channel, so I wanted to say thank you to everyone that supported me. I don't really make these videos to kind of grow into some kind of crazy big channel. I mostly make them just to help people out and kind of share my testing and the info that I've got from the characters that I've tried out. So I'm really glad to see that my videos have been helping people out and have made the game more enjoyable for them. So I'll try to keep that going into 2023, and if I can get to around 10,000 subs, I might even do a face reveal since a bunch of people have been asking me for that, but I don't really tend to do that because it makes editing tougher, so I might just do that on live streams. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch these. Have a happy holidays and a happy and safe new year, but the video's now over.